The Syrian Network for Human Rights has put the toll now, it keeps changing, but within 72 hours, the toll is reported to be 1,300.
We affirm that we will hold accountable with utmost firmness and without any leniency anyone involved in the shedding of civilian blood or who has wronged our people. Those who exceeded the authority of the state or exploited their power of their own interests will not be above the law.
He's asking people who, many of whom are extremists and they're hateful, also people who suffered under the Assad regime, to go and protect people who supported the Assad regime. We saw this news kind of just breaking when it started on Thursday of these crackdowns in Syria, which are not really crackdowns anymore so much as just full-on massacres of mostly Alawite civilians in Latakia and Tartus mainly, but also in other areas. For context, back when the French were in charge of Syria, they had this proposal that Syria looks like this, okay? And the Arabs were like, nah. They wanted Lebanon to be that, and they wanted Syria to be these states here. The reason the French wanted this is they were a little bit sharp. This is also, they knew what they were doing. The French did this because they were worried about nations of vastly different, like radically different ethnic groups that have had pretty bloody pasts and pretty big reasons to not trust each other being roped into one country, and they thought that it would sow sectarian conflict and national conflicts and everything else. The French were aware of this, you know? If you're European, you know that nationalities overlapping across borders or dual nationalities, or two nationalities sharing borders, is sometimes kind of an issue. So the French saw ahead. They recommended this. They also recommended that the Christians in Lebanon don't take all this extra territory out here. They initially advised against that. The Maronites said, no, we want it anyway. The area of relevance here is Latakia and Tartus, these two provinces down here, because this is where the Alawites live. The Alawites in Syria are an ethnic group that makes up about 12% of Syria's population. They are a spin-off branch of Shia Islam. And the big controversy around them is that they, in large part, probably more than any other group in Syria, support Assad. Because Assad was an Alawite. Assad and his dad. So for a long time, Syria has been governed by Alawites who came from this region. And Assad is also a sectarian. He was a sectarian Alawite. A lot of what Assad did, and a lot of his war crimes, and a lot of his atrocities, and human rights abuses, and everything else, he said that he argued that one of the reasons for him doing that was to defend minorities, because he believed that his opponents were all radical Sunni extremist terrorists who would massacre like Alawites and Druze or whoever else. And that's what Assad basically used to justify his brutal rule over Syria. That's what he used to justify chemical weapons. And yeah, he had other reasons as well, but that was kind of his premise. So today, Assad is gone. He's been replaced by HTS, the group that is led by a guy by Ahmed al-Shara, otherwise known as Jolani, who used to be who used to fight alongside al-Qaeda, who used to be part of al-Nusra, which was also al-Qaeda affiliated, has distanced himself from them over the last 6-7 years, and is now heading HTS, which is still largely Sunni Islamic, which is still largely Islamist. They believe in like Islamic rule to some degree, but much more moderated. They have also gotten rid of people in the movement who are more extreme, like ISIS or Al-Qaeda affiliated. So HTS in general have, for the last 6 or 7 years, have behaved quite differently from what you would expect a group like ISIS or Al-Qaeda or al-Nusra to behave like. They act in a different way. One of the things that they do constantly is they preach about the need to protect minorities. But you might remember that as Assad was falling, or just as Assad fell, you might remember me saying something like this. Heavy region here. You might remember me saying this about Alawites. And there are a matter of days where decades happen. Well. This is the Alawite heavy region here, Latakia and Tartus. This is the group that is basically seen as the potential canary in the coal mine for how rebel rule is going to go, because Jolani has given assurances to the Alawites in the past. We're about to see if they actually stand the test. Alawites, for those of you who don't know, are a Shiite sect. They make up about 10 to 15% of Syria's population, I believe. Assad was an Alawite. He was a sectarian Alawite, and the Alawites supported him. So, being an Alawite under the rule of Sunni Islamists, especially, who don't like the Assad regime and are also potentially a bit extreme, you probably don't want to be an Alawite in their hands, but we just have to watch, I guess. In any case, the bar is fairly... Okay, that's more or less what I said in the... I think this is December 8th or 9th. 9th, okay. So... people were warning about this. It's not the most unpredictable thing to happen, but on Thursday, what started as a crackdown, a government crackdown against what was called a nascent insurgency in Alawite areas of pro-Assad militants, has resulted in massacres. So initially, they said that there was an insurgency in Latakia and Tartus areas, and people who were pro-Assad militants had apparently ambushed people and grabbed even like a small part of territory somewhere in here. And the government's response was to crack down on it. And in that crackdown, something like 1,300 people are reported dead, most of them civilians. The Syrian Network for Human Rights has put the death toll now, it keeps changing, but within 72 hours, the death toll is reported to be 1,300. About 200 plus of those are from the security forces, and about 250 of them are pro-Assad militants, the rest of them civilians. There have been reports of sexual abuse, there have been reports of humiliation of prisoners, which are backed up by video evidence as well, and there have been reports from witnesses of gunmen from the security forces just marching through, going door to door and carrying out arbitrary executions, just like people in the head, dumping them. Yeah. It's pretty bad. Lots of people have fled. People have fled to Lebanon. Some people are hiding away in mountains and in forests. Witnesses have said that the gunmen were indistinguishable from government forces. It seems very likely that this was government forces. And yeah, that's what we have. We have 1,300 dead in less than 72 hours. It is not good. Jolani in the past... There's actually something that we caught a little bit earlier that most people don't know about. In the past, Jolani had actually once called for indiscriminate bombings of Alawite areas or indiscriminate attacks. He had actually mentioned that in the past. But that was back when he was a lot more extreme. He's since been trying to shed that reputation and shed that image. So today... he has come out and given this statement.
Syria's President Ahmed al-Shara has called for the national unity and peace and is promising justice.
نؤكد أننا سنحاسب بكل حزم ودون تهاون.
We affirm that we will hold accountable with utmost firmness and without any leniency anyone involved in the shedding of civilian blood or who has wronged our people. Those who exceeded the authority of the state or exploited their power of their own interests will not be above the law. Anyone whose hands are stained with the blood of Syrians will face justice sooner rather than later.
The government also announced the formation of an independent committee to investigate the violations and identify those responsible for the killing of civilians. The Ministry of Defense says the security forces are working at checkpoints surrounding the city of Latakia to ensure the safety of civilians and prevent remnants of the former regime from carrying out any acts of sabotage.
Oh, this was it. This article, I think it's from 2015. This is back when Jolani was part of al-Nusra. And this is what he said back then. He said, there is no choice but to escalate the battle and to target Alawite towns and villages in Latakia. And I call on all factions to daily hit their villages with hundreds of missiles as they do to Sunni cities and villages, Jolani said. So in the past, he has called for indiscriminate attacks on them. So there is a lot of evidence based on HTS rule over Idlib that these moderation efforts were sincere from Jolani. Like, he does not seem to be the same person at all. His movement doesn't behave in the same way, and in the past hasn't behaved the same way. But what's happening right now does seem very reminiscent of Salafist, indiscriminate like Sunni extremist violence. It just seems like back to square one. Now, he has said, I'm glad you told us to wait in promoting Jolani as a good guy. Yeah, well, the fact is we still don't know if he's a good guy, right? Like, or because we don't know how much control he had over the situation, right? We do know in the past that he has not given a fuck about Alawite suffering. We also know that his rhetoric about changing and moderating and defending minorities has been sincere before, because they moderated towards Christians and Druze, like someone in the chat saying. The problem is that there were not Alawites in Idlib. And if you're a Syrian rebel against Assad, the thing with Alawites is that not only are they seen as defenders of Assad, and many people who were involved in this fighting were defenders of Assad, they were pro-Assad insurgents, but they also are Shiites, like they're a spin-off of Shiites. And if you're a Sunni extremist, they believe in something called takfiri, which is the idea that Shiites are basically the same as apostates. They should be. So we don't know. Like right now he's pledging like harsh measures and justice and everything like that. But we don't know how sincere he is in that. He might not be at all. We also don't know how much power he has over that situation. So for Alawites who live currently in Latakia and Tartus, which is where pretty much all of them or most of them are, there's no guarantee that this is going to stop. There's no guarantee that this doesn't turn into 20 or 30 or 40,000 dead. Right? This is like people talk about death tolls. All right, death tolls. 1,372 hours is insane, right? That's a huge rate. That's massive. If you look at Gaza, let's say the death toll is like as high as like the higher estimates, like 60,000. Okay, spread across a year, you're 164 dead a day. Okay, like 1,300 people dying in 3 days is huge. It's a massive number. Anytime you see the word liquidated, you know it's crazy. Yeah, well. Has Russia actually pulled out of Syria? No, there are still Russian, well, mostly, but there are still Russian positions in Syria, especially in this area. Yeah. I think they're coastal mostly, but yeah. Is 60,000 really one of the higher estimates? Yeah, in terms of estimates, there are projections that go much higher, but 60,000 I think is a higher estimate, yeah. I'm not counting those like unreviewed Lancet projections. No, I'm not counting those. Not the 500,000 or whatever the people are saying.
Security forces deployed in Latakia after days of clashes on Syria's coast. A war monitor says over 1,000 people have been killed since the violence broke out on Thursday, when armed men loyal to former President Bashar Assad ambushed government security forces. DW could not independently verify the death.
People are saying the SNA is involved. I've heard that theory, but the problem is that so many of these theories about what's been happening here and who's behind it, or whether or not a bomb was dropped on one of the Alawite villages, like all of this is coming from tweets, and I don't know what to do with that. Okay, right now what we know is that lots of witnesses have said it might be government forces. Some people have said it might have been SNA, the Turkish-backed SNA. Some people said it's them. But I don't know if HTS are uninvolved, right? Like, I don't think that's been claimed either. I think they're still involved as well, no?
The attacks spiraled into revenge in Syria's Alawite majority towns, carried out.
How much does Jolani actually control? He only had Idlib before. Well, he's the president. He's the current president of Syria.
By armed supporters of Syria's new leaders. Witnesses described scenes of lootings and mass.
People were slaughtered in their own homes, people from all sects. Today I got shot at because I was filming. I told him, I'm filming you, take the car, but I'm filming you, just so you know. He cursed me and then shot in the direction of our house.
Over 100 of the state's police and security forces were also killed. Bodies found in a mass grave in Qurdaha.
What happened was very painful, and at the same time it was a harsh thing on the entire Syrian people. May God have mercy on all the martyrs.
Despite calls from Damascus for unity, sectarian tensions remained. A gathering mourning casualties from both civilian and security personnel, interrupted by pro-government demonstrators who chanted hate speech against the Alawite minority. Syria's interim leader has now announced a committee will be investigating the deadly clashes.
We will hold to account anyone who is involved in the bloodshed of civilians or harming our people, who oversteps the powers of the state or exploits authority to achieve his own ends.
Many hope
Yeah, they also said that they've started a committee. They've established a committee to investigate into the events and see who's culpable. So standard Jolani behavior, just, you know, get an institution involved. Like, I don't know. The thing is like, I wouldn't have been that surprised this early on that there would be like discrimination against Alawites, that there might be like hate crimes, that there might be some Alawites fighting back, or some Alawite or some pro-Assad insurgency, or maybe even like little cells, like terror cells that are still Assad loyalists, and then the crackdown on that being disproportionate. I wouldn't have expected 1,300 dead in 3 days. That's a lot. That is a lot. And Jolani is basically asking people. He's asking people who, many of whom are extremists and they're hateful. Also, people who suffered under the Assad regime, to go and protect people who supported the Assad regime. Like, even outside of the sectarianism. The sectarianism makes it like a million times worse, but even outside of the sectarianism, it's a really situation. Because that's what they see Alawites as. I don't even know if any majority of the Alawites supported Assad by the end, but to them it doesn't matter, you know? What's the distinction between Alawites and Shia? I don't know. I just know that they're like a spin-off. Are there grey wolves there? I don't know what that means. What? The best he can do is invite international observers? Oh, I know that there are human rights groups there, but I don't know if there were going to be international peacekeepers or anything, or whether or not they could help, because UN peacekeepers are like the least likely people to get involved in like security crackdowns or anything. I don't know, but that's where we are now. We will see. We'll see who's involved. We'll see whether it can be contained or if it gets worse. I don't know. Not good either way. Is this still going on? No, I believe the fighting has stopped for now, but I don't know if Jolani is actually. I don't know if they've started. I think Jolani said that they sent government security forces down, like up there, to maintain law and order, but I don't know. I don't think the investigation is like starting properly, or they're trying to identify perpetrators. The thing is, like, people, again, it's like one of those things. People film themselves doing it. They filmed themselves doing it. Whatever it is, I feel like any developments are going to come fairly quickly, because right now you're going to have people on the anti-Alawite hate train who feel like they're emboldened and have an opportunity to take out as many people as they can before the government actually cracks down on it, if they do. And on the other side, you've got Alawites, especially ones who are still Assad loyalists, who feel like they need to fight to defend themselves, or just to fight at all, like, or want to take revenge. Like, yeah, it's just a bad time, bad times. I didn't expect something that big to happen that quickly, I will say. I expected it would be. I thought the Alawites would be kind of, but yeah, that happened fairly suddenly. Currently very skeptical, considering how strong and widespread the Assad intelligence system was, and those structures do not just disappear. Well, yeah, there are still going to be loads of Assad loyalists like kicking around, and some of them are obviously armed. But I also don't know, like, that those Alawite groups that started with the ambushes on Thursday, I don't know if that was a response to discrimination, or soldiers harassing people, or soldiers looting, or whatever else beforehand. So, you know, here are the investigators. Okay. I guess I can just look like this. Surprising with people he names. Scoring gap between the most radical and the vision he wants to install at the head of state. This person, far from being a radical, is a magistrate at the court of Raqqa. Decided to desert in 2012, not endorsing the policy of the Syrian regime. Worked for the democratic opposition. Okay. So this guy is not very much like HTS or al-Shara. Khalid Adwan al-Hilu. Joined the opposition in 2011. No connection to the new power. Again, this is just Twitter. I don't know. Doctor of criminal law. Not an HTS supporter. She even worked for the former regime. Assad advisor in the 2000s. Wow. Former security framework of the former regime and former general. Is this guy trustworthy? Cedric Labrousse. Syrian National Coalition. He was engaged in the construction of records and assassinations and missing persons under the former regime. Okay. We'll see. Apparently the first guy is super racist towards Shiites and Alawites. Okay, well, rip. But other ones are apparently more moderate and more sympathetic. Interesting. Interesting squad. Interesting blunt rotation. Okay. Well, good luck to them. It's going to suck if Jolani turns out to be a terrible guy. I've been so intensely and parasocially invested in him and his story. You guys know, I hope you guys understand that when I do the institution jihadi thing, the DEI jihad is like, that's kind of memeing, right? Like, I've tried to say constantly that there's always going to be like a cautious optimism with him because, again, he's not just rhetoric. He's not been just rhetoric. Like, the rule in Idlib, like, in many, even in the takeover, even in the end of Assad's rule, right? Like, HCS behaved very differently from ISIS or Al-Qaeda. They did. They behaved differently. They didn't just talk differently, they behaved differently. But we have not seen them in a situation like this. We don't know how they're going to handle like the group that they're going to be most likely to threaten, which is obviously Alawites. So we will see. We will see. His history is way too crazy to ever really trust him. Wow. Well, okay. Well, we can just make him an Israeli prime minister then. Why? Off.